All right, everyone, it's time to weigh in on sort of the little exchange between Kim Jong-un, glorious leader of North Korea, and then Donald Trump, glorious leader of the United States, over the nuclear button issue, which was trending yesterday. Because Kim Jong-un, he came out and he said, well, basically a warning to the U.S. and the world, don't, fuck with us. I've got a nuclear button on my desk, ha ha. Kim Jong-un saying basically, hey, I've got the H-bomb. It's different from having a couple of primitive atomic bombs. Leave us alone. Donald Trump then comes in and says, oh, yeah, well, I have a nuclear button on my desk, too. It's a lot bigger and it actually works. Basically saying, screw off, we're not intimidated. Now, in principle, I can say that's a good way to respond because basically the United States has had a tendency on North Korea with Bush and Obama especially to simply back away over and over again. Like basically North Korea says, big bad, we're going to bomb things, and the U.S. says, no, you're not. And North Korea conducts a test and the U.S. sort of backs away and doesn't want to get involved, doesn't want to say anything further. And we haven't really had a strong foreign policy leader in the Oval Office for some time. Like, people who think that Clinton was great on foreign policy, no, it was more that the Russian premier at the time was just a drunken chucklehead and thought that Bill Clinton wanted to be his best friend and then decided to give away his whole country, basically. That's his big crowning achievement at that time. Prior to that, of course, we have Herbert Walker, who his big foreign policy push was he puked on the Japanese prime minister because the sushi didn't agree with him. Then we have Reagan, and Reagan was okay on foreign policy, but a lot of people were afraid he was going to nuke the world. So that probably did bring us pretty close to like 2 minutes to midnight sort of scenario. Sort of since the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was the worst it was. And we're supposedly pretty close to that, I think 3 minutes to midnight right now, and I can actually agree with that. When they decided to tick the clock ahead again, they keep prefacing it on maybe like Trump or something, but really the breakdown in U.S.-Russian relations dates to the late Bush administration. So it has people want to blame Obama. It started with Bush, and they want to blame Trump. Obama worsened the situation. We'll see what Trump does, but Congress largely has decided to keep him from talking to Russia, which I think is a total shame. As far as the North Korean threat to the U.S., it is minuscule at this time. So far, at this current moment, North Korea does not have the ability to target us with hydrogen bombs. It has the ability to target us with missiles. Now, if they put chemical weapons, or certainly biological weapons on them, bioweapons would be worse than nukes. Honestly, I would rather see a dozen West Coast cities get nuked off the face of the earth than to see them hit with, weapons that deploy anthrax or some other communicable disease. Do you realize how difficult it would be to actually contain it? Everybody would die. There'd be no way to treat them all. You'd have to simply quarantine all affected areas. If quarantine is broken because of people trying to flee in the wake of such an attack, they're going to have to get gunned down by the military. Our military will have to kill its own citizens at that point. There'd be no other way to save the rest of the population that's not infected. It'd be like a zombie apocalypse. It would be chaos. And people in other places would panic too. If a nuke were to hit San Francisco today, ultimately, the rest of the country would steel itself, say, be out for blood and say, we will nuke them now. Ha ha, we're going to watch them burn live on YouTube. But if North Korea were to fire an anthrax weapon at San Francisco, or super flu or something, all other urban areas in the country, people would begin evacuating to the countryside thinking that the final epidemic was here. And there'd be some degree of reason for them to actually be considered legitimate in that line of thinking. I am unsure that the U.S. medical apparatus is capable of dealing with a situation which a few 100,000 people are hit with some communicable exotic ailment in an urban area. While people, meanwhile, will be trying to flee in every direction, the military would have to surround and cordon off the whole area, keep people from going to and from. It probably wouldn't be successful anyway, because so many places would get hit, there wouldn't be enough troops to deploy to all of these enormous metro areas to keep them boxed in. Meanwhile, those people, rightfully so, who aren't yet infected, would take up arms and fight the U.S. military trying to get out and away from the infected people. So it would be absolute chaos. It would be 10 times worse than nuclear war. So when Kim Jong-un says, I have a little red button on my desk, who fucking cares? You can launch missiles at the U.S., that's clear. You can certainly deploy your H-bombs and probably they still have atomic weapons too. Certainly deploy them against South Korea. and wipe them off the face of the earth with, these new improved weapons. Japan could wipe Japan out. Could certainly do quite a number against China if they chose. Hell, the North Korean hydrogen bomb stockpile at this point would be about the same as probably like a Pakistan. That's pretty intimidating. It's got to be intimidating to China to have yet another nuclear state on its doorstep. Yeah, it doesn't have like 8 megaton weapons like China uses, but it certainly has weapons larger than the primitive 5-6 kiloton ones they were first testing. Now they're up to 50 kilotons. They'll get higher. It's going to get bigger and badder. Eventually, they will have long-range missiles to take them. But Trump's reaction also, it just looks unhinged. I will say this in full disclosure. Realizing that Trump's, sort of playing Kim Jong-un's game probably finds it amusing, and I don't think that a tweet is going to start, the Korean War going hot again. It does make him look unhinged, because the problem is, if he just vaguely threatens Kim Jong-un, nobody really cares. They might condemn Trump for it, but who cares? The reaction to this latest attempt to intimidate Kim Jong-un has been more visceral and more, I think, paranoid. The fact is that North Korea does not pose an existential threat to the U.S. Even if it did have long-range missiles for each of its hydrogen bombs, whatever total it has, it still wouldn't be an existential threat. They would lose, we would win, they would cease to exist. That's the fundamental premise of the situation. When people, I see some legacy media outlets like, we've got to admit the only thing we can do now is accept that North Korea has nuclear weapons and back off and normalize relations. Very, very fluffy and happy. That's funny. 3 successive presidents have said it would be a red line for them to even have them. They never did anything. In fact, Clinton gives them the material they need to jumpstart their atomic program. Bush says it'll be a red line if they don't test one of them weapons. They unsuccessfully test one. He says, okay, well, that's enough. Don't do it again. They successfully test one. He does nothing. Obama says, well, they must know that we cannot tolerate a nuclear North Korea. And then they test, 3 more weapons while he's president. Now they've tested another under Trump. Trump, though, is the only one who has apparently taken it seriously. The problem is, for anybody that's worried, can I say something to the Democrats out there? And you're not going to like to hear it. If you're worried about what Trump may or may not do to respond to North Korea, you've got to blame Obama, Bush, and Clinton primarily for the problem because they didn't respond properly. If they had responded properly, we wouldn't be having this fucking problem. So don't try to blame Trump. He's not the progenitor of the issue on the Korean Peninsula. It dates back to the 50s. It dates back to the 50s. We're still at war with North Korea. Officially speaking, a state of war has existed continuously between the US and ROK and the North Koreans for over a half a century. Since the middle of the 1950s, there was never a true peace treaty. That's why there are so many armed guards on the DMZ. Why do you think they're there? Because we're at peace? No state of war here, folks. Just ignore the 10,000 artillery pieces over there. Just ignore the nuclear-capable subs. Just ignore the aircraft carriers. We're just there for a holiday. We're just training and stuff. You think it's normal for a foreign state to threaten to annihilate its neighbors with nuclear weapons? And that's the big issue, too. And here's why. People have to be fair here. Trump didn't start it, number one. He didn't start the issue, and he didn't start this current argument with Kim Jong-un. North Korea, not the U.S., North Korea is the only state acting in the situation that has threatened to deploy nukes against non-nuclear states. We're threatening, Trump, at his worst here, is threatening to unleash nuclear hellfire against a nuclear state that has already threatened to do so against several of our allies in the region that don't have nuclear weapons. The idea of a nuclear state using such a weapon against a less powerful, non-nuclear foe is asinine. Everybody would condemn that, so why would we then condemn Trump for responding? He's basically saying, in a nutshell, and he has consistently, we will defend the Republic of Korea and Japan. If North Korea acts up and threatens them, we will respond. Because, of course, Japan and the ROK, even now combined, cannot overcome the nuclear problem in the region. They can flatten the DPRK in half an hour in a fair fight. They can establish air superiority, they'd bomb the shit out of the artillery. At that point, it's basically North Korea using civilian partisans with bamboo sticks that may or may not even show up to fight. They would be completely destroyed. They don't have modern tanks, they don't have modern missiles, for the most part. They don't have modern any artillery. They don't have modern equipment for the most part. They have a small elite special force. It looks a lot like the elite guards Saddam had. You remember those wonderfully well-equipped, supposedly really well-trained Iraqi soldiers that we fought, you know, during shock and awe, and within a week they had all fled? Yeah, those were Saddam's elite guards. More of the regular troops were going to stand and fight at that point. Hell, they ended up fighting each other half the time. Some group still loyal to Saddam fights one that's defected. It all fell to shit within weeks. What do you think would happen with North Korea? Look, we've got all sorts of new toys now. We don't have to use nuclear weapons at all. For Trump to belly up to the bar and say, hey, I've got a little red button too, but it's bigger than yours, isn't a dick-wagging contest. It's a reaffirmation to our allies, but he probably should have said it differently. In all honesty, he needs to scale that back and go back to the more vague threats. North Korea gets it. Kim Jong-un's not crazy. A lot of people want to think he's a madman. No, he is a rational actor. He knows full well that if he actually offensively strikes the U.S., that's game over. The North Korean people cease to exist. In fact, Korean people cease to exist because the ROK will get hammered too. The radiation will waft over their country. They'll get hammered by artillery. North Korea would probably use H-bombs on them. Basically, everything in the Korean peninsula would be, completely barren. There'd be craters everywhere. It would look like Fallout. 20 years later, people would be paying big bucks to go into the Korean peninsula and play real-life Fallout. You know, I'm going to build a settlement today. You know, they'd use paintball guns or something like that. They would landscape the whole country and make it look even more disheveled. But, and here's the big but, there is a way out according to the North Korea's doctrine. And that way out that they've designed, and they've thought of this for decades, is establish enough of a deterrent that if they do attack South Korea, because all they want to do is reunify the peninsula to create one Korea, essentially, enough of a deterrent that the U.S. won't get involved and that China won't get involved. That's essentially their end goal. Now, we could countermand this by giving the ROK nukes, but then we would be the ones proliferating. There has been some debate over whether they and Japan shouldn't have them. I think it's a terrible idea. I think that we should just put our own weapon systems there. I think we should beef them up. And I think we should prepare for the very real likelihood that at some point in the next 10 years or so, the North Koreans are going to announce, hey, we've got subs idling off your coast. They're nuclear capable and they can launch them inland for some distance. Every city on the western half of the U.S. is at risk if you get involved. We're about to invade South Korea. Have a nice day. And at that point, D.C. will have a mental breakdown because they're like, we can either abandon the Republic of Korea, lose a major ally, major trading partner, and see communism double its strength in the peninsula, and an already nuclear state, by the way, gain access to very, very good technology, very good military technology that the ROK has, and inherit all that shit. There may be a nuclear exchange anyway in the meantime. Or we can get involved and we probably get nuked. It would be an impossible scenario. The problem is, if you get all those big cities hit with H-bombs, the loss of manpower and economy would put us, we would be fucked, basically. Other power, China would certainly be the world power at that point. We would be essentially giving the world to China by getting involved. What we're going to inevitably have to do, if we care about South Korea at all, we either lose our pride and a major partner, or we lose out to China if we don't act very quickly. Now, we can cut the head off the dragon, so to speak, by simply knocking North Korea off before they gain that capability. That's why Trump is spending so much time shaking hands with the Chinese. And there are those who don't want him to succeed, and so they're trying to basically fuck him around. They're trying to get him out of office. I don't think it'll work. People were talking about Bannon earlier, like, Bannon referred to treason in regards to the Mueller investigation. Well, he's giving up Trump. No, he's talking about Kushner, dude. He's never liked Jared Kushner. He calls Jared Kushner a globalist, and Kushner's been implicated. Kushner's under investigation by Mueller. I'm not surprised that Bannon hopes that he gets nailed for treason. But that's not Donald Trump. That's Donald Trump's son-in-law. He's not even a blood relative. He's not even someone who Trump apparently trusts anymore. And then he was talking about money laundering. Hey, yeah, that involves Manafort and Tony Podesta. That's been on the table for months and months. And you stop talking about it. You say, they're assuming that Trump himself is involved. It's like, you've got to be nuts, dude. They've already covered this story. It's old news. But it wasn't Trump. It was Manafort and his people. They're not Trumpites. Tony Podesta's a Democrat. Manafort apparently likes to launder money with the Democrats. which is funny since he was, of course, Reagan's campaign manager or something. Yeah, great guy. He gives us someone who almost nukes the world, like the most overrated Republican of modern times. And then he's working with people who are associated with the most overrated Democratic family, the Clintons, through the Podestas. Very funny. But yes, Kim Jong-un has threatened, oh, I got a little red button. Trump's like, I got a bigger red button, so shut up. You might want to tone it down a little bit, because otherwise people are going to start getting nervous. And it's the paranoia and nervousness, really, that's perpetuating, by the way, I don't know if Trump gets this, the atmosphere in which Trump is seen as like a Russian agent. So it's become problematic, I think, for him at times. That's about all. Peace out.